Hello, today I'm going to teach you how to set up a crown or bridge seat. This is a very simple procedure I feel like most people can do. We'll start by checking the invoice on the case. So when you first go into our lab, it can look like this, which can be a little bit overwhelming, but no worries. Typically the night before we will pull our cases and put them on a table right in front of you, so it makes it easy to locate the case. So when you grab your case, it'll come with a bag of contents, and you'll see the first thing on there will be the invoice. We'll open up the bag and make sure everything is accounted for. First, you might stumble across some burrs, which we will put in another lab bin designated specifically for these burrs. Next, you'll come across the crown and a little stump sometimes. Make sure it is the correct tooth number, and I'll show you how to check for that in a second. And then finally, you will come across the actual invoice itself. And on this specific invoice, it shows that there were 2 models included, as well as the crown. I just wanted to pause here for a second. I want you to take a look at what it says before crown. It says Aesthetic Zirconia Full Contour Crown. These are very important words, especially when setting up for the room, because setting up for a zirconia crown versus an Emax crown is a little bit different, so we want to make sure that we are really looking at this invoice. Last thing I want to bring your attention to is the tooth number, so it's tooth number 14. Sometimes we'll receive a shipment with 2 crowns in it, but it only says like tooth number 14, so make sure we're paying attention to that. Here's the crown as well as the mini model to go with it. And then here is another example of an invoice for a zirconia crown for tooth number 2. So again, just pay attention to the invoice. Then make sure to package everything back up and return it nice and neatly back into the lab bin. Sometimes our crowns will come in beautiful boxes like this one. And this one is still a zirconia crown, so we would still use the same cement on this one. And by checking the invoice, it'll say monolithic zirconia, which just means it is a zirconia crown. But if you take a look at this next invoice, it'll say lithium disilicate towards the bottom of the invoice, which translates to Emax. So we would use different cement for this kind of crown, and I will explain later in the video how to set up for each and every one of them. So now we're going to gather our supplies, and just like any other procedure, we're going to grab our restorative tray. And again, this is what our restorative trays look like in each office. This is the Westerville office, and then the Hilliard restorative tray. Some hand pieces, crown polishing burrs, which have little green and pink points inside of the burr block. And you can see that they have finishing burrs as well, like carbides and footballs, to adjust the crowns as needed. And lastly, articulating paper. Next, we'll set up the room, and there are, like I said, 2 different setups, so really pay attention to the invoice. The first setup is for the zirconia crowns, and I have compiled a whole list so that you have something to refer back to when you're setting up the room, and we'll go over the uses of each item. So the first one is the case itself for the crown to seat in the patient's mouth. Alcohol to clean out the crown before priming with Z-Prime. Z-Prime is one of the first steps into seating the crown. And then the actual cement. This is RMGI. We only really use it for zirconia crowns. So that's the big thing here. So these 2 things go hand in hand with each other, the Z-Prime and the RMGI. And you typically only use it for zirconia crowns unless the doctor requests otherwise. A good way to remember this is zirconia and purple cement. Next, we have our Concepsis, which is the green stuff or the blue stuff to clean around the patient's gums after removing the temporary. Sometimes after removing the temporary, there can be food or debris stuck underneath and kind of packed up in the gums, which inflames the gums. So this stuff really ensures that there is a clean seat. And we want to make sure that the tooth is free of moisture, including heme or blood, so we will have our Viscostat out just in case. Next, we need to get out our micro brushes to clean up before and after cementing, as well as for priming the crown with Z-Prime. We'll have out cotton rolls as well as 2x2s to keep the tooth dry and to clean up the cement after cementing. The curing light to cure if necessary, and then floss in between the contacts and clean out between the embrasures. And as always, have your bib and your sunglasses ready, and that's how to set up a crown seat. So let's get into how to set up an EMAX crown setup. So it is basically kind of like the same thing. Again, this is for the lithium disilicate crowns. If you take the two lists and kind of compare them, they are almost exactly the same, except for you do not use Z-Prime or RMGI for this. Instead, you'll prime with silane, and then you will use a stronger cement called Maxim, which is blue. Or if the doctor requests, you will use something called Reliax, which is a yellow cement. So your setups will look something kind of like this. So instead of having the Z-Prime and RMGI, you'll have the Maxim and silane, or the silane and the Reliax. So not much of a difference here, but make sure we are paying attention to the invoices and the differences between the crowns. Now we'll go over how to fill out the route slip for this kind of procedure. So if everything went as scheduled, you will put your initials as well as the doctor that you worked with, done as scheduled, and then the room that you worked out of, and the next appointment. So in this case, 6-month recall, because everything was done. Now, if not everything went as scheduled, what you will kind of end up with is something kind of like this. In most cases, if something didn't go right in the crown seat appointment, it's typically because the crown didn't fit, the shade wasn't right. So what we end up doing is a continued procedure, remake the temporary, and then we end up bringing the patient back in 3 weeks to try again and seat the crown again. So it would just be a repeat of the same process from the same day. And I put call as soon as possible because sometimes the lab will rush the case back and we don't have an approximate date to get the patient scheduled, and we want them to have their crown as soon as possible so that they don't have to wait any longer. So that's how to set up for a crown seat or a bridge seat, and it's pretty straightforward, but if you do have any questions at all, let me or another team member know and we would be happy to accommodate you. Thank you very much for watching.